My name is Mike Perry. I work for, my day job anyways is at Riverbed Technology. Right now we make network acceleration devices, and we're doing a pretty good job at kicking Cisco's ass. So we're looking for, short plug, we're looking for reverse engineers, C++ developers, QA, fuzzers. If you like working with networks and you like making them faster, come talk to me afterwards and we can try and hook you up with the job. We're looking for pretty much everybody. My affiliation with the Tor project, I'm basically a volunteer. I do this stuff after hours in my free time because I really think that privacy and anonymity are very important. So mostly from a IP address obfuscation perspective, just basic data hygiene is my main motivation, but obviously also interested in helping whistleblowers and people in other countries who are censored, or even people in this country who are censored, whose speech is censored. Okay, so to start off, we'll give you an overview of what Tor is from the ground up. Basically, it's a volunteer network for privacy, anonymity, and censorship resistance. From a user perspective, basically what you have is a SOCKS proxy. For those of you who are not familiar, SOCKS 4A and 5, it also speaks SOCKS 4. When you configure your applications to use this proxy that appears on localhost, the connections that your applications use are converted into, in Tor parlance, what are called streams. These streams are multiplexed over what Tor calls circuits, which are essentially paths through the network. These circuits then are in turn multiplexed and shared with other clients' routes over the node-to-node SSL TLS connections. A circuit consists of 3 nodes. You have the guard, the relay, and exit. Each one of those has somewhat special properties, which we'll be elaborating on later. This is essentially what a path through Tor looks like. Now the top diagram has 2 circuits, 2 clients that have chosen paths through Tor. I'm trying to illustrate with the 2 separate clients the circuit over TLS connection multiplex at the guard to relay position. Basically between the intranodes, as I said, these circuits are multiplex, and an external adversary shouldn't be able to differentiate individual circuits at that position. In the second client, the green client, you have a client that's making a couple of TCP connections to his Tor proxy, and these are being multiplexed over the same circuit, sharing the TLS connection again with the red client, and then at the exit node, where you emerge back onto the plain unencrypted internet, or your internet connection, the streams are split off again into their individual TCP connections. And to illustrate how it is that the guard doesn't know the exit node that you have chosen, that your client has chosen for its path, the bottom diagram shows the circuit extension properties of Tor. Essentially, nodes publish public-private keys in the Tor directory, or public keys in the Tor directory that your client uses to negotiate first the TLS connection to the first hop, then a secret key to that node to build the first hop of its circuit. It then instructs that node X, in this case, to extend to the relay node Y, and using the public key Y has published for its onion routing key, it extends to Y, and then repeats the process to Z, at which point it can finally instruct Z to make TCP connections according to Z that are accepted by Z's exit policy, which is essentially the set of IPs and ports that the Z or exit node will willingly connect to. So the talk is securing the Tor network. So I think in order to really secure something, you have to understand how an attacker is going to go about attacking it. And in order to do that, it is helpful to sort of break down the classes of attack and the vulnerability points of the network. So I've categorize these attacks in sort of two dimensions. First, we have the class, and then later in the next slide, we'll talk about the position. The class breakdown is essentially the passive versus the active attacker. The passive attacker is going to be one who is just observing your traffic, doing things like timing correlation, as was talked about this morning in the timing panel, fingerprinting of traffic usage, doing things like trying to figure out what a fetch of a particular Wikipedia page looks like when it's encrypted and tunneled over a Tor circuit. Another passive attack is an intersection attack, taking multiple arbitrary attributes of a user and combining them and narrowing in on them using like location, if they reveal where they work, or if they reveal other key details about themselves that can be used to narrow in. All these don't require any sort of active manipulation of the network. The next class are those attacks that do. These include things like running a node, lying about its bandwidth to get more traffic. Right now, the node choice that you saw in the previous diagram for the network, the node choice is weighted by the advertised bandwidth of what those nodes essentially say that they can carry and that they are carrying, and it's possible to lie and attract more traffic. Along with this, nodes can also essentially fail those circuits that are created through those hops to bias the node selection so that they can manipulate the path by failing the ones that they don't like, and also modifying application layer traffic at the exit, inserting plugins, application layer attacks like that, maybe even exploiting the browser. And we'll cover all of these in greater detail as we go on. Right now, just trying to give examples of these categories. An internal adversary is one that's a node operator. They're able to look inside the node, and differentiate individual circuits, like the individual circuits that are relaying through the node. And at the exit node, they can also differentiate determine which streams apply to which particular circuits. So they are able to get that level of detail as well. So they're able to see the multiplexing that went on at the client end, essentially. An external adversary is one that's observing the Tor network from outside. These TLS connections, you presume that they cannot see inside the circuit level multiplexing. This is something that might occur at ISP or global level. I believe, although this is still an open research question, I believe that if you were running a Tor node, and you're rate limiting it to a fixed rate, so long as you are constantly carrying traffic at that approximate rate, this sort of adversary is frustrated to some degree. I would think a large degree, but obviously we don't know. Solid research hasn't been done, but likely frustrated to at least some degree by running Tor as both a node and a client. So if you run a Tor node, that's where the idea would come from, that you are increasing your anonymity or your privacy by at least frustrating to some degree this sort of adversary. So in this diagram, I've tried to outline basically all the different points that Tor can be attacked, which, as you can see, is pretty much everywhere, except for the TLS connections in between the individual nodes. Those may be vulnerable for very long-lived RSA keys. All the Tor keys are 1024-bit RSA currently, so some of the nodes are getting up there in age. I think some of them may be several years old. That may become a concern in a few years, but right now the assumption is that those links are solid. But going from right to left, basically we have, or left to right, your left to right, you have surveillance and confiscation at the client. Now this is a danger for people in countries where Tor and other security tools are illegal. Bypassing censorship filters can get you in trouble. I believe Germany just recently had some scary legislation that may or may not, is vague enough that it's indeterminate whether it applies to tools like Tor. So maybe these things can be used as justification to seize a computer and look at its history, for example, or the browser cache to see where you've been. So that's an obvious attack. Another one would be where the user were to mistakenly use Tor, misconfigure it in some way. Probably the most common way would be to use the SOCKS 4 as opposed to 4A or 5 mechanism, which basically this just means that you're not asking Tor to do DNS for you. So your DNS queries are then going to leak over onto the local network and give away information about you, where you're going. The active network attacks start to come in at the next hop between the client and the guard node. This is where adversaries can do things like bias your guard node choice or entirely block Tor. They can make sure that for your first hop you're only able to connect to a particular guard and that they control. Then they can move on to the active circuit failure attacks that I briefly mentioned earlier. Now, basically what this would involve is the guard node that they control then says, okay, well, there's an extend to the client that I want to observe the traffic, try to extend to a relay node. Do I like this relay node? Is it one of my colluding evil peers, or is it not? If it is, then they can allow that circuit to be made. Otherwise, they can just fail that circuit and continue to do so until a relay node that they like is chosen. That relay node could then potentially repeat this process at the exit node until an exit node that is malicious is chosen to basically capture the entire path. And you can cut out the middleman in here as well. That's why I don't know if you can see it that easily on this diagram, but that's a dashed line. If you can find a side channel between the guard and the exit node, such as timing information may be sufficient. May be also possible to do clever things like XOR a protocol field that only your colluding exit nodes then would undo. So if your colluding exit node wouldn't undo this protocol field and cause the digest not to fail, then that circuit will fail. So all the good exit nodes will just naturally say something like this: digest doesn't match, and then fail to extend it. That sort of thing may be possible. Going further to the right is application layer attacks. Essentially, these are things where the adversary is going to do things like insert traffic to insert a cookie to tag you, or insert a plugin that's known to bypass proxy settings and is going to connect directly to their server, or do some sort of man-in-the-middle on SSL, or the server itself can try and insert similar malicious content. At the bottom, you can see the timing attacks are another dangerous attack. Research has shown that in simulation, essentially 95 to 99% ability to correlate, or 99.9% ability to correlate the entry into the network to a stream that's exiting the network. Recently at PET 2007, Stephen Murdoch presented a variation on this attack where sampling information was used. So you don't necessarily need the whole stream. You can just probabilistically sample from the traffic stream and then get a rough approximation of the rate of traffic going through there, and use that to a high degree of reliability correlate that entry to exit stream. So in that sense, an external adversary is able to do that without necessarily running any nodes, but surveilling one of the, as was mentioned earlier, one of the internet exchange points that were discussed in this morning's talk. So the things look pretty abysmal up to this point. So what are some of the approaches that are done to try and improve that picture? Verifying node operators used to be done. It seems to be kind of anathema, I guess, to an anonymity network to try and do that. Also, the network is just growing large enough that this has become a practical difficulty to verify everybody that runs a node. So that is pretty much no longer being done. Although people who do this get certain preferences, like being able to be certain that nobody else can take their node nickname and other such things. Path selection hacks are another. There's a couple of path selection hacks for trying to avoid situations where it's clear that an external adversary would be able to observe both the entry and exit. Tore up from the floor up. This was the slogan of Anonymous, I believe, by the chaos theory people. The idea is to create a bootable CD or some kind of router or some kind of thing that handles all your Tor connections for you. There's multiple different ways that this sort of idea can take. Pretty much anything that can go through Tor is shoved through Tor, and anything else is just dropped on the floor. Node scanning is one way that we can try and detect people who are maliciously modifying content, maliciously modifying circuits and failing circuits, or trying to do guard node bias and such things. Improving network speed and reliability is also an important property to try and encourage more users to use Tor, and securing the applications is sort of the answer to application layer attacks. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a different threat model there, so there's some subtleties need to be addressed. So path selection hacks. What sort of things does Tor currently do? /16 hack is basically, the idea is that don't choose in a single path. Don't choose any two nodes from the same /16 net mask, so that presumably an ISP that is surveilling their traffic wouldn't be able to do these correlations. The problem is that a lot of ISPs do have disjoint IP ranges, and you can always go up another layer on, or up another layer on the internet hierarchy, I guess, and target those internet exchange points. Guard nodes. I've been sort of calling nodes guards without really explaining what they are. I was saving it for this slide. They are a sort of a path selection hack, essentially, to try and pick a fixed set, a small set, 2 to 3 nodes that come from the top 50% uptime and top 50% bandwidth, so that they're presumably more reliable and able to carry traffic for a long period of time, unlikely to go down. These were originally developed, I believe, to protect against Paul Syverson's and Lasse Oliver's attack against hidden services, which are essentially hidden websites inside Tor. Attack was mounted to repeatedly fetch hidden service pages until the client chose a circuit for their hidden service that had a first hop that the adversary controlled and was able to recognize the timing pattern as being identical to one for the hidden service page that they were trying to fetch. This sort of attack was adapted to the external internet by Tim Abbott et al. From MIT, I believe, at PET 2007, to insert JavaScript and meta refresh information, so that a exit node or website could cause you to continually refresh or make new connections through Tor. And without guard nodes, this sort of behavior, continual fetching, would cause you to choose new circuits over the course of those multiple fetches, and choose a first hop that then the adversary was able to do the timing correlation between their multiple fetches that they were inducing and the traffic entering their node. This sort of hack also can reduce long-term fingerprinting attacks. An adversary that's interested in correlating traffic just of a few users sometimes can run a couple of guard nodes and just wait for arbitrary users to fetch a document through Tor that they recognize the fingerprint of, and they can just try and harass those users. Guard nodes can mitigate this in a couple of ways, in that if you're trying to stay with your fixed set of nodes, you can go to trust those after a while. You can, if such an attack were to go down, a rational user could say, well, if I wasn't, fingerprinted in this attack, I wasn't harassed, I therefore have a larger degree in my trust of trust in my guard nodes over time. And it also just helps to generally limit exposure to that entire network for those sorts of attacks. There are some issues with this. Nodes do go up and down, so they can rotate. Your guard nodes can rotate over time, and there have been a couple of fixes recently to Tor to try and limit this sort of rotation. Tor routers and live CDs. I sort of group these all together. Again, the Janus VM, AnonymOS, also to be released at DEF CON, I think Zero Bank Virtual Machine sort of falls into this category. These are pre-configured systems that essentially try to route all your traffic through Tor. Now, whether they're like a gateway device or whether they're a virtual machine that you boot into and you load up and then use that for your Tor activity, they essentially function the same way, in that they're going to try and address these application layer attacks where things might bypass proxy settings by blocking all this stuff that doesn't fit through Tor. So that you won't have any of these Tor bypass issues. There is a potential, or rather a significant flaw in this, especially for these devices that don't allow finer grain control of your Tor activity, that circuit reuse, the circuit multiplexing property of Tor, as I showed on the earlier slides, can be a potential source of app correlation, like if you're using an AIM client that has your name in it, or you're SSHing to a machine that your physical identity controls, or using an email account of one of your non-anonymous NIMs. Those can be correlated with your anonymous activity. Antivirus software updates can have this property as well. Now, there's a feature, for those of you who use Tor, there's a new identity option on Vidalia, the Tor user interface, that allows you to refresh your circuits. But if you have like a router that you just plugged in and are hoping that all your Tor traffic is going to now go through this router and everything's going to be grand, if there's no interface to say that I have a new identity, then there is this circuit correlation problem. So centralized network scanning. So I've done a fair amount of this. Basically, this revolves around the Tor control port. So I think this thing is pretty neat. I'm really glad that it exists. It allows you to sort of take a lower level approach to your Tor usage, but also at the same time you're not actually writing a complete Tor client. It allows you to do things like build the specific circuits or paths through Tor. It allows you to attach what streams you want to these paths, and it allows you to detect, have events for failures on circuits. So you can say, okay, well, this circuit failed when I was trying to extend to such and such a node. I can record that failure and note that this failure happened and build statistics this way. I can also measure the bandwidth. There's bandwidth events for streams. So you can say, okay, well, this stream exhibited this amount of bandwidth while I was using it. So Snakes on a Tor and TorFlow were a couple of the projects that I developed for scanning the network in this way. Snakes on the Tor, the goal essentially of that was to verify the MD5 sums of the of random URLs. The idea is to detect nodes that are modifying content, or in other words, to get the motherfucking snakes off the motherfucking Tor. It also sort of grew into this thing where I realized, okay, I could also verify the node reliability and verify bandwidth and try and check to detect liars. And these sorts of things. There are some issues with this. One of the main downsides is that Well, I guess we could talk about some of the weaker adversaries that were detected with this. First of all, there was a Chinese ISP, not the Tor node, but the ISP was doing man-in-the-middle on SSL traffic, basically giving snake oil self-signed certificates for websites, so that you visit https mail.google.com and you'd get a certificate that was signed by mail.google.com rather than VeriSign or whatever. And so I was able to detect this by just basically comparing the SSL certs that I fetched outside of Tor to the ones that I had fetched through Tor. We also found nodes that were blocking pop-ups. A couple of Windows machines are apparently running antivirus software that inserts JavaScript pop-up blocking code. There was another node. This was a little bit more interesting. The Google Analytics stuff. The stuff that the Google JavaScript glue code that gives you all this information about what your users are doing on your website. This node was stripping out all of that, so that when you visited those sites through this particular exit node, the Google Analytics stuff just wasn't being run, which I thought that was, possibly broken, but possibly amusing and interesting at the same time. Some other stuff, we did find some nodes that were spoofing SSH keys, that were providing garbage SSH keys. They didn't seem to actually be doing much with them. Like, it didn't seem to actually be able to complete the man-in-the-middle to the second hop, or to your actual SSH host, but definitely a fake SSH key was presented. The problem with this sort of scanning, though, is that a targeted adversary, someone who's targeting specific users who speak a language that that the scanner is not familiar with, is not able to issue these Google queries to get these arbitrary URLs. They can be attacked, and we just won't see that attack happening because we're not scanning for the URLs in those languages, for example. And it's also vulnerable to detection in a number of ways. So this is essentially the image of the arms race that centralized scanning faces. The things that it can detect are illustrated on top. I don't know if you can read all that. Basically, the node bias and connectivity issue is something that you can detect while you continually are connecting to all these guard nodes. If some of them appear down from your scanner, or you have general connectivities to some of them, you can notice that maybe guard nodes themselves have firewalls for all but the clients that they want to accept. The other thing is circuit failure and bandwidth lying. As I mentioned, you can detect these. You get the event for at what point this extend had failed, and you can say, well, it was either this node that I was extending from or the node that I was extending to, and you can start to add up those statistics. You can also verify bandwidth, like I said, that way, and at the end you can do the MD5 sum against content and try and detect it. But at the bottom here, we have all these different options that the adversary has for the arms race, is that they can try and you as a scanner, you are using Tor differently than pretty much everybody else. You are using you are not using guard nodes, so you're connecting to a ton of different entry nodes for a short period of time. So your IP that's doing this can be recorded by these guard nodes and say, okay, well, this guy only connected for me for a few seconds, and then he went away. And then he did it again, maybe an hour later, when he connected to me again. And then that pattern starts to develop, and then that IP can be given selective service, and better, if that node is lying about bandwidth, can be given better bandwidth at that guard node. And those circuits might not be failed for that IP. The similar thing can happen at the exit node, where the various behavioral issues of the scanner, if it's not sending all the exact HTTP headers that a normal client would send, if it's not fetching images from the page, or all the images from the page, if it's not evaluating JavaScript, these sorts of things can be used to build up a list of URLs that are obviously being scanned for, and then the malicious node knows not to modify those. Likewise, the malicious node can do these targeted attacks, or utilize the fact that some sites are just prone to generating dynamic content, like news.google.com, for example, is going to change all the time. If we're trying to verify the content of that with just an MD5, that's obviously not going to work. So the adversary can attack those sorts of pages pretty much with the current scanner with impunity. And it also can generate false positives as well for location tagged pages. Some nodes will see the German version of the page, some will see the Dutch. So how do we address some of these issues? Well, decentralized network scanning can make scanning a little bit more stealthy, a little bit more difficult to detect. Unfortunately, you lose the content-based scanning mechanisms, which we can pick up by basically securing the application layer. So the options we basically have are client-based. You can use the reliability averages from TorFlow that you gather from centralized scanning. You can say, okay, well, we expect only 10% circuit failure on the network. Nodes that start to exhibit 40%, 50% are probably doing something wrong or overloaded. We can alert, and then you can alert the user that says this guard is failing a certain percent of the circuits, or you can only connect to a certain number of guards. You can only connect to like 2 guards. And we've tried to connect to others. For node-based scanning, another potential, you can try and get statistics on queue capacity to various nodes. You can try and report deviations, these deviations that you notice in these queues for use as either feedback for clients to try and load balance better, or just as possibly overloaded nodes. So here's a diagram of what this sort of passive, decentralized scanning would look like. You have on the left, you have the top client can detect this guard node that's failing circuits by a high rate of circuit failure. The middle node could potentially detect the fact that it can't connect to more than 2 guards, and the third node can try and detect, okay, this is a lying node that I'm not getting as good service through that. That's obviously the more difficult one to do. In fact, and all 3 of these I should clarify that all 3 of these are possible things that we can do to detect these nodes and these sorts of network environments, and they're not currently implemented in Tor. But there are possibilities to detect this sort of behavior. The scanner, likewise, can listen to some events on the Tor control port that would export information about the queue size, the rate of queue fill versus the rate of queue drain, and detect overloaded nodes versus lying nodes. For example, at the bottom, both those nodes are going to probably appear very similar to this scanner because they're both going to be exhibit high queue lengths and very large queue disparities between their queue drain versus their queue fill. Likewise, the extends through that fail circuit node over there will show up, and pretty much most circuits will probably fail as they either extend from or extend to that malicious node that's failing circuits to one of its, except for the cases where it extends to one of its colluding peers. So some of the scanning is exacerbated by the fact that the Tor network is unbalanced. There's a bug actually with guard node selection. Guard nodes were accidentally being chosen uniformly for several releases of Tor, which have caused various load balancing issues, increased incidences of circuit failure. This is one of the reasons why some people are able to use Tor and Tor is okay for them, whereas others are just completely frustrated by their Tor experience. If they end up having to pick some of these unbalanced Tor nodes, they're just going to exhibit a large degree of timeouts, a large degree of circuit failure through these nodes, and their Tor experience is going to be pretty bad. Bandwidth, there's another issue with bandwidth clipping. Bandwidth is to try and mitigate adversaries being able to say, okay, I have like 15 gigabits of traffic that I can carry. Please send all your Tor traffic to me. Tor clips the maximum bandwidth that a node is able to advertise at currently 1.5 megabytes a second. Now, the problem with this is there are about 32 nodes that have significantly more, ranging from significantly more to just a bit more than that threshold. And when clients are choosing probabilistically based on bandwidth and is being clipped at this 1.5 megabit barrier, then essentially those nodes are not being utilized to their fullest capacity, and some of this load is being transferred onto those slower nodes. This has been detectable during scans of the network. During my DEF CON talk, I'll be presenting in a bit more detail some of these statistics and corresponding graphs to go along with this to illustrate this. But the nutshell is that the top 5% nodes have essentially 7 times more stream capacity. They have an average stream capacity of about 75 or 70 kilobytes a second, 70 to 75 kilobytes a second, whereas the rest of the Tor network is about 10 kilobytes a second as far as bandwidth. The next 10%, the 5 to 15% range exhibit average stream capacity of about 30 kilobytes a second, whereas again the average is about 10 kilobytes a second for the rest of the network. And another indicator that this is due to the guard balancing issue is that there are high circuit failure rates that tend to drop off at about the 50% mark, and higher circuit extend times that will drop off at about that 50% mark. So following from this, I think that improving speed and usability is an important part of Tor security, for the reason that more users essentially mean a larger anonymity set. There's at least one incidence where a user was harassed because they were one of 2 users, Tor users at a university, and one of the Tor users was allegedly suspected in being involved in some sort of online scam. Now, this is obviously, the Tor network doesn't have any interest in protecting scammers, but this sort of pattern applies equally well to people who are trying to anonymously blog about their work. If they take their Tor laptop to work and try and connect to their blog from work using Tor, and they're the only Tor user at work, it's very easy for that network administrator to say, oh, well, there's only one user connecting to the Tor cloud, the list of 1,000 or so published Tor IPs, and say, okay, well, if there's only one person that ever connects to Tor from work, and there's this anonymous blogger who's posting at the times roughly corresponding to this Tor usage, well, we pretty much have the match. And that's dangerous in a lot of other scenarios as well. Essentially, in order to attract more users, users basically want speed, and they want the network to be easy. I contend that a lot of users don't really need as much anonymity. I think that a lot of users probably fall into the same boat as myself, where you basically just want your IP address and information not to be in every marketing database on the planet, and the stuff that you purchase correlated with that, and your Google queries correlated with that. For this reason, and also the reason that the end-to-end timing attacks are probably the most deadly attack against Tor. At least there are no real theoretical reasons for not shortening the path length. I've proposed a 2-hop proposal to allow people to choose 2-hop paths. Now, there are a lot of implementation details that an active adversary can take advantage of to fail circuits if they don't extend to their colluding peer. They can also do things like look at exit policy, and if the exit policy is really restrictive, they can say, oh, well, they probably went to that IP then because that's the only one that node allows. And there are the devil is definitely in the details in that sort of proposal. But I think that for users that really don't need much more than IP address obfuscation, it does help to add more users to the network and can increase the anonymity sets of people of those people who really do need the full anonymity of the assured or higher assured anonymity that 3-hops provides. Johannes Renner, also one of the Google Summer of Code students for Tor, is working on intelligent path selection. So he's essentially trying to find paths, if there are paths with lower latency that can be used to try and improve Tor usability and the degree to which choosing these lower latency paths can affect anonymity. So now that we move into the application layer, securing the application layer, the issue with this is that applications often don't take into account what it means to be secure for Tor. The threat model that Tor faces is essentially a superset of the threat model that regular internet usage faces. You can't have any UDP, being used by your application. That'll go straight past Tor. Unique identifiers are not so good, especially when they can be correlated with Tor usage and with non-Tor usage. Proxy settings definitely have to be sacrosanct. You can't just try and say, oh, well, let me try and fetch this outside the proxy and see if that succeeds. If it succeeds, that's fine. Otherwise, I'm going to use a proxy. That sort of behavior obviously does not mesh with Tor usage. And location information can't be transmitted, and updates can be dangerous for malicious exit nodes if they're not signed or encrypted. A lot of Firefox extensions are provided over non-HTTPS URLs. So if you update through those, you run the risk of, if that update happens over Tor, you run the risk of a malicious exit node injecting a rogue extension. Likewise, you run the same risk at, say, the DEF CON network or another open wireless network. So what does it look like to try and secure Tor from the web point of view? So there are a lot of variables involved. Essentially, they boil down to these 6 core categories. Proxy settings obviously have to be sacrosanct. Plugins shouldn't bypass plugins or anything else shouldn't be able to bypass proxy settings. Now there are a couple of clever ways that JavaScript can bypass these proxy settings. JavaScript can set up event timers and wait for Tor to be disabled. Or you can have CSS-style pop-ups that operate on the mouse over event or the hover event and fetch a document through Tor. And if you turn off, or through the, just based on that hover event, if you turn off Tor, then that sort of activity can occur, and reveal your anonymity that way. Correlation between Tor and non-Tor is a big one that can happen. This is for cache, this is kind of a surprise because you can inject unique identifiers inside the cache of inside of an element that's used to render a page, and then if that element is cached, you can then traverse the DOM and look for that unique identifier inside that cache, like iframe or whatever. Cookies are also really particularly deadly thing to have with Tor. And there's a scenario. So for example, mail.google.com, if you go to https mail.google.com, you think you're secure. You say, okay, I'm only going to be using this site through SSL. You are visiting entirely, or you only use the SSL version of mail.google.com. Then you say, okay, I'm done. You just turn on Tor without thinking about it. You are then vulnerable to the fact that the Gmail cookies are not tied to SSL traffic. So a malicious adversary on your local network or on the Tor network can insert a document element for mail.google.com, cause your browser to transmit the GX cookie, and then that adversary can then use that GX cookie to log in as you, send emails as you, fetch your entire inbox or whatever. So I mean, this is something to keep in mind for DEF CON and for the Black Hat network. You want to make sure that when you're done using Google, even if you are using that or your mail or even pretty much any service that you're not sure of the status of the cookies, whether they're tied to SSL or not, you want to make sure that you clear those cookies as soon as you're done using that service, because somebody with AirPoon or whatever can just inject a content element into CNN.com when you visit it and grab your GX cookie and start sending email as you, or start downloading your entire inbox. And this can happen over Tor, it can happen at your local wireless network or whatever. So it's a good reason to clear your cookies regularly. History disclosure is another big one. Turns out that with JavaScript, You can query about 10,000 URLs per second to see based on the visited attribute. So if you notice when you're viewing a website, the links that you visit are purple or red or whatever, depending on the style sheet of that website. But then which is different than the links that you don't visit. And this history can be queried at an astounding rate. And you can use this to determine what Google queries have been mentioned, can have been made, and if a user has visited a particular website for Chinese dissidents or whatever, the Great Firewall could potentially do this to see if they visited certain Wikipedia pages or what have you. Location information is another one. You don't want time zone being transmitted, or your locale. Those can be dangerous. Basically, give away what jurisdiction you might be in. And then general anonymity set reduction. This basically falls under user agent strings and other properties of your browser that are just going to limit you to essentially being like the only Iceweasel Debian user on the network. And history records are another thing that comes in for that local confiscation scenario. So I actually did some work on improving Tor button to address every one of those vulnerabilities. We disable plugins while Tor is enabled. We'll isolate the dynamic content for every Tor load state. So actually go through and tag every single tab that you load with the Tor state that it's loaded under. So if it's loaded under Tor is enabled, that state is associated with that tab. If it's loaded under Tor is disabled, then that state is associated with that tab. And using the Firefox extension NSI content policy API, we then check to see if any document fetch from that tab corresponds to the current Tor state. And if the current Tor state corresponds to the fetch state, then we allow it, otherwise we disable it. So that handles CSS pop-ups and handles JavaScript fetches, and all that other nasty stuff. We also disable JavaScript in general for pages that were in an opposite Tor state. Cookie jars, to try and protect your Google cookies, we have a cookie jar mechanism contributed by Colin Jackson that basically puts all your non-Tor cookies into this jar and clears your browser cookie state while you're using Tor, and then restores it afterwards. You also have the option of clearing your cookies entirely. Similar things happen with cache. We make sure that it never writes to disk. History management, we're able to, using again code from Colin Jackson, block all the history disclosure attacks, CSS-based attributes, JavaScript DOM inspection. Basically, we just tell the browser, there's an interface that you're allowed to tell the browser if a link is visited or not, and you can re-implement that interface and basically say, okay, I haven't visited anything if Tor is enabled and this setting is enabled. User agent spoofing, we do a bit better than the other extensions. The user agent switcher extension misses a few key properties of the Navigator JavaScript object that we fill in and make it look like you're a Windows user using the most recent version of Firefox. Time zone and locale spoofing, this is a bit more complicated. We essentially just hook the JavaScript date object and cause it to report GMT times always, and also report that you're an English user using the English char set. So let's see how much time we got. So to demonstrate this extension, I have a list of essentially several common browser information disclosure pages here. Oops. We'll fetch all these via not Tor and then refetch them during Tor and show you guys that in fact Tor button has blocked all of these. We have CSS history disclosure. date disclosure, using plugins to bypass proxy settings. I'm going to save that one for later. Using non-JavaScript methods of determining your history, the CSS attribute essentially, and CSS pop-ups. So here, I don't know if you can read that. Let's see if I can jack this font up. So sort of ruined the rendering, but that may be a little bit more legible. That's not working. You can see I have a Linux i686, particular Gecko build, various other attributes, platform, operating system. These are two Navigator JavaScript objects that are queried. So I'm going to turn on Tor and reload this page. Hopefully I'm connected to Tor. Reload this page. And here's while that's reloading, we can have a look at the CSS exploit here. They were able to determine, yes, I've been to Google. Yes, I have been to /. So I've turned on Tor. Now if I reload this guy, we'll just switch to this next example. Here we have the time zone information. Obviously, I'm using Pacific time. If I reload this guy, this should be addressed. Here, all my plugins are listed. I can reload this guy. And CSS history, again, using no JavaScript whatsoever, they were able to use a CGI to see that a background image was fetched for the visited attribute of Google.com and determine that I had visited Google. And obviously, that can also be used to determine if you've issued specific Google queries as well. So that didn't. Must have changed this. So here, the CSS for, I'm going to reload this. This guy looks like he got cut off. The CSS for the exploit was unable to determine, now that Tor was enabled, that I had visited Google, unable to determine that I had visited /. Over here, why did that fail? It looks like they only fetched part of the document there for some reason. So here on this CSS exploit, you can see that they were unable to tell that I visited Google now that I've enabled the Tor button. And it's not by clearing history. It is by hooking those extension interfaces. So your history is in fact preserved. Here's this thing finally loaded properly. You can see that the user agent has been reset to Windows. A different Gecko version, different Firefox, different Navigator object properties to obscure that. Time zone has been reset to GMT. And this guy looks like, and no plugins. I don't know why these things are only partially loading. So that pretty much covers every application layer vulnerability that we are aware of for Tor usage via the browser. So there was a couple, as I mentioned, there was a couple of random interesting technical details. Probably the only one that's really worth belaboring is the JavaScript hooking techniques. Those are, if you're curious about how I hooked the date object, I think that's pretty interesting. Basically, I used JavaScript lexical scoping to conceal the original date instance and then hook the JavaScript methods for basically all the date functions. I tried about 12 different ways to try and bypass that lexical scoping and access the original date object. I was unable to find any way to get past that. I looked at quite a bit of JavaScript references to try and find the scope object and all this other stuff. So please, if you're a JavaScript guru, have a look at your conference CD and have a look at that little code snippet and see if it looks legitimate to you. And if it doesn't, shoot me an email and tell me I'm crazy. But I did try and vet this thing pretty extensively. And pretty much every reference I could find on JavaScript did say that lexically scoped variables are an effective way of creating private member variables that other interfaces absolutely cannot access. So who knows if there's some hack that you can actually trick the browser into doing that. But as far as most JavaScript books were concerned, that was a legitimate way to hide that original object from any sort of access. So we're pretty much wrapping up. Some final thoughts. Tor security is not internet security. It's a superset. There's a lot more issues that you have to deal with. Adversary has different goals. They want to bypass your proxy settings. They want to get you to reveal unique identifiers. They want you to run plugins or what have you. And a lot of apps don't consider these sort of vulnerabilities as real vulnerabilities. So it's sort of an uphill battle. Here's some random people that have contributed various pieces to this. Scott Squires was the original Tor button author. Colin Jackson had the history blocking and cookie jar code. Johannes Renner is the Google Summer of Code student who did some TorFlow contributions for path selection. And of course, Nick and Roger are awesome for having built Tor, and some of my coworkers probably deserve a shout out for signing expense reports and whatnot. So what can you do if you really love Tor? There's a few things that you can do to help it out. On the conference CD, I've included a Linux script to do rate prioritization. So if you run a web server or whatever, you can run that script and prioritize all your shell server's traffic above Tor, and then you can run a Tor server without having it affect any of your Tor your normal usage of your shell server, your web server. I use that. I've been using it for a few months on a pretty fast Tor node, and it's been pretty good. I've not even felt, even over SSH connection, not even felt an additional lag from the Tor server. So it's a pretty good way to run a Tor node and not have it really affect anything that you're doing. Also, getting on the ground and just trying to convince application developers, particularly in the open source community, where they may be more willing to listen to stripping out unique identifiers if you don't want them. Raising awareness that privacy issues should be considered as part of regular security measures and vulnerabilities, and as regular vulnerabilities. So, pretty much concludes things. Any questions for? We've covered I could I'll show up some of these diagrams. So there's the attack point. If anybody has any questions on attacks or possible defenses. Yeah.
You said you identified a number of malicious nodes. About how many, how active, how much traffic?
So there were, I think, 3 to 4 SSH spoofing nodes. There was two different flare-ups of those. They seemed to come in pairs. Like a couple of nodes would show up that were screwing with SSH keys, and then they went away for a while, and then they showed up again with similar contact info a few months later. Modifying application level traffic, like I said, the antivirus, the pop-up blocker code seems to be pretty prevalent. I would say there's about 10 to maybe 20 nodes that are running some form of pop-up blocker. They actually inject JavaScript into your page to hook the window open JavaScript call and try and block pop-ups for you. There was only one that was blocking the Google Analytics that I found. There was only one node that we found doing the SSL, other than the SSH. The SSH man-in-the-middle nodes were also doing SSL man-in-the-middle, but the Chinese ISP was only affecting one Chinese exit node. There's a fair amount of content, random connections being closed, streams being closed, especially with nodes that go through China, possibly due to the Great Firewall. There are a few exit nodes in China that will randomly close connections on you if you're looking at particular websites. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think that pretty much the large share of them. Yeah.
Something like a blacklisting or so?
Yeah, so when these nodes are discovered, there's in Tor, for Tor clients greater than 012x, there is a bad exit flag that it gets slapped on these things when we find them. And then for all the Tor clients more recent than that version, they will obey that and not use that node as an exit. I don't know, do we still mark them as invalid as well for the older ones? I think there's also we can take away the valid flag, which means that these nodes won't be used essentially for routing at all. Are they used as middle nodes in that case then? If they're invalid, so then they wouldn't be used for guard and exit nodes when we take away that valid flag for the older Tor clients out there to protect them as well. So there are two mechanisms in place to protect, to list these nodes.
So then how does that valid flag impact your two-node proposal?
Obviously, you just yeah, exactly. They're just dropped. Yeah.
You mentioned this Chinese ISP. What's your sense of larger foreign government or even domestic government involved in subverting or nodes over?
None that is visibly occurring. That seemed to be. I mean, most of the Chinese exit nodes aren't spoofing SSL. That seemed to be a freak occurrence. Yeah, we haven't seen any visible government attacks. As Roger pointed out to me in the conversation, it's likely that any government that actually wants to attack Tor is probably going to do it from a traffic analysis point of view, getting high up on some core routers and doing sampling attacks and those such things. Yeah.
As a potential node operator, what can I do to make sure that users of my node don't get in trouble with my ISP?
Oh, well, you can specify your exit policy is the biggest step you can take. You can say, okay, I'm just not going to be an exit node entirely, in which case you'll only serve as the guard and relay positions in this diagram, so you won't be exiting any traffic at all. That should eliminate it entirely. What I also do is I put make sure that my Tor IP resolves to something like Tor exit as the first part of the domain name, and so it's clear when this thing shows up in the logs, it's like Tor exit, whatever, and then presumably somebody will be like, well, what's Tor exit? Either Google it or try and visit that page. Of that domain, at which point I have, some kind of disclaimer. So that says, well, okay, well, this is a Tor node. It's used for censorship resistance. We can't really, there's no way for us to really differentiate the bad guys from the good guys. And that sort of standard description. Yeah. Not in the U.S. We haven't even had any node seizures in the U.S. But in Germany, there have been, I believe, 2 instances of widespread crackdown. Like a lot of the exit nodes in Germany were seized at one point. I don't think any legal action was ever brought against those node runners. There were a couple of people who had some somewhat nasty encounters where their computers were taken for like a day or two and then presumably inspected and then returned. I don't think anybody has actually been.
Yeah, none of the seizures were because of the Tor servers. They were always because some IP address was in some log and they went and fetched the computer and they had no idea the Tor was there at all. We've actually talked to the German government, courts and so on, and for the most part they say, oh yeah, we don't mind Tor. We're fine with that. We're just following the law. So make of that what you will.
Yeah.
Are there any ISPs that trying to take traffic or slow down or change its priority?
I have not actually looked into that. I don't think that. I mean, none that we've seen. I mean, it's quite possible that could happen, but haven't really have any definitive proof. There's, as I said, there are load balancing issues that are kind of making things a little bit hazy to see exactly what's going on at this point. So, as far as traffic capacity, yeah.
I don't know if you already explained this or not, but every other time I go to the tour validation page, it says that it's either dual home or it's not a valid IP for an exit.
I actually have not used the Tor validation page. Is there? I mean, some Tor nodes do not list their actual exit IP in the directory. Like they'll exit out of some other IP either due to misconfiguration or some kind of NAT upstream, so that you'll connect to it from one IP and then it'll exit via another. That's a possibility, but I don't know why it would happen every time. I would suspect some kind of configuration issue. Are they actually? Have you? Is it ever your IP? I mean, have you tried going to like what'smyip.com or whatever, just to make sure that?
Yeah, it takes you about every 10 minutes.
Huh.
And some of them validate.
Some of them not validating. I would suspect that would be because of those nodes that do not advertise their actual exit IP. Do we have a count on how many there are of those? I think Coderman was looking at that.
There are a few, and they're fast. So it does happen. We've been working on a script that actually does active testing and says, okay, well, what is your IP then? And that way we can make a better answer.
Last year when I was reading your guys' page, you had a prohibition or warning against P2P traffic over the Tor network. Has that become more of an issue? Have you guys started to stop that?
We have not. We're not actively stopping it. The default exit policy blocks the common P2P ports. It is definitely discouraged because of the load it puts on the network. And so far, we did have an issue with it where a Canadian was this target of a DMCA complaint, which was kind of strange. I don't think there have been very many other extreme DMCA complaints. It is the case that nodes that allow a lot of have a very very liberal exit policy do exhibit very loaded characteristics, like they have high circuit failure, very low stream capacity. So it's possible that just the default exit policy is enough to stop most of the P2P traffic, and the rest of it, the majority of it, is just killing these few nodes.
It can almost be self-limiting if you allow it. Kill yourself.
Yeah. Right. All right.